AA6DD, K6YYL.
K6YYL, AA6DD. Good morning, Kim.
Good morning, Will. I thought we would do part 2 on our radio propagation.
Sounds like a good plan. We'll start right now. Do you have any questions first?
No, go right ahead.
Okay, well, we were discussing, as you recall, the different categories, the names and titles of what we call the waves, it's all one wave. We don't know which one it's going to turn out until after the fact. But if we have a dipole way up in the air and on all the different hand bands, and we start radiating RF off of it, we have categories that we can call the signals. One category is called the ground wave, which is the wave that travels in the ground and above the ground. I got it. Probably one of these terrible phone things. Hello? Yep. Just another ad. It goes along the ground and in the ground, and we discussed that in length, and we talked about the direct wave, which is from antenna to antenna. But we haven't discussed the sky wave to any big extent, or the space wave. Now, the space wave is relatively easy to understand. It's just part of part of the radio signal that goes on out into outer space. But the sky wave is any of the waves that ends up bouncing off the ionosphere. The ionosphere was discovered just before World War I. Some radio scientists in the United States, and this was really cutting-edge technology at the time, were able to send a pulse of RF, and they got a reflection, and they could measure the time, the time of that reflection, and therefore calculate the elevation off the ground of such something that reflected it. This was amazing. Well, remember we had talked about Heaviside and him taking Maxwell's equations and turning it into 4. Well, he understood electromagnetic radiation so well, he immediately said that there had to be an ionized layer at that elevation that would refract the signal back down to Earth. And for that reason, there isn't the Heaviside layer is what it can be called, as well as the ionosphere. Any questions at that point?
No, go ahead.
Okay. It turned out that there were multiple layers, depending on what frequency you were on, and multiple heights. And they were arbitrarily labeled, and instead of starting at label A, B, C, D, because they didn't know if there would be any layers discovered lower down, they sort of started at the E and F to label these things going in both directions. Today we know that there is a D layer in the daytime, an E layer in the daytime, an F1 layer in the daytime, and an F2 layer in the daytime. And if we really get a very high sunspot cycle, where 6 meters is being bent by the F layer, you could even call a layer above the F2 layer a G layer or an F3 layer that's at about 600 kilometers in elevation, which is way, 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 way up there. But that's not the general elevation of each, and we'll go through what each one typically has. The first layer is the D layer, and the D layer has a height of starts at about 25 miles up, which is 40 kilometers. In fact, anyone listening to this, you might write that down, because that's actually where the miles and kilometers are even with each other. In other words, 25 miles is exactly equal to 40 kilometers. that means the ratio between the two is 1.6 between miles and kilometers. Miles being 1.6 bigger than a kilometer. It turns out also that the D layer, generally speaking, absorbs radio signals. So it's a big absorber of radio signals, and that's because the air density is very, very light at that point, but it's still dense enough that when it gets ionized, it recombines quite rapidly, and that recombination tends to absorb RF signals. Now let's see if we can get a mental picture about how high that is. If you think about a mile being about 5,000 feet, and the mountains around here are just our foothills are 5,000 feet. The Appalachian Mountains on the East Coast are around 5,000 feet. Our big mountains around here are almost 2 miles high. They get 10,000 feet, 12,000 feet for our high mountains here in Southern California, which are very massive high mountains actually, which is 2 miles. And even if you talk about how high airplanes fly, at 30,000 feet or more, which is, 5 miles up or so. Well, that's where most of the weather is in that area. So this layer is way, way above where it starts at 25 miles up above where the weather is and where the atmosphere is thinning out quite a bit. As we go through the D layer, we eventually, it dissipates away and another layer shows up called the E layer. And it's at 100 kilometers, 62 miles up. And then as we go through that layer, and these layers have some real thickness to them of, quite a few kilometers thick, in fact, each one of them. We eventually get to the F1 layer, and the F1 layer starts around 200 kilometers or so, which is about 125 miles, and that breaks into the F layer, and the F layer can either be 2 layers or 1 layer, and it depends on what seasons of the year it is and whether it's day or night, whether it's 2 layers or 1 layer. Generally speaking, in the daytime it's 2 layers, and at night it all collapses down to 1 layer. And its elevation has a huge range. You can go from 200 kilometers all the way to 600 kilometers or 360 miles up. So you see that's a lot of distance between them. Any questions at that point?
No, go ahead. AA6DD, K6YYL.
Okay, well let's talk about how this affects the actual radio signals that we're transmitting. The principle you need to think about is what the physicist Planck showed in the late 1800s. He measured and showed that energy was proportional to frequency, or frequency is proportional to energy. In fact, Einstein's formula E is equal to mc squared is really based on that measurement. And if you think about it, it means that the amount of energy in a radio signal will double when you double the frequency. It also means that the ionization to bend it back must double in order to bend it back to Earth. So there's a relatively straightforward correlation with how easy it is to bend this radio signal back to Earth and its frequency. So that if you look at any of the ham bands for that matter, obviously 160 meters will bend back to Earth twice as easy as 80 meters. And bend back to Earth twice as easy as 40 because we're doubling frequency every time. And 40 will bend back to Earth twice as easy as 20, and so forth and so on. Realizing that, it sort of explains why each one of these ham bands have such a drastic different kinds of distances when it propagates through the ionosphere as to how easy they are to bend back. It also means that the lower frequencies will be absorbed by the D layer much, much easier than the higher frequencies, which explains why 160 meters goes away in the daytime. Still have wonderful ground wave propagation there, but that's it. The D layer absorbs all the energy, and you cannot communicate through the ionosphere because it's all absorbed away. 80 meters will also, but it's better in the morning and the evening before the D layer is really super ionized, and you can still get to the F layer or E layer and bend back to Earth. And then 40, of course, usually the D layer doesn't shut it down. It will stay open all day long, bouncing off of the E layer quite often, as well as the F layer, depending on whether it's early morning, late evening, or the middle of the day. Middle of the day will be mainly sporadic E, or E layer period from there on up. We'll talk about sporadic E, which is a weird nodule that happens inside the E region itself as you go on up. But so what does that mean? Well, because we're coming off of the lower part of the E region and the lower part of the F region, and it can bend so easily, 40 meters can go straight up and straight down in the middle of the day. Well, that means here in Southern California, we can work at Arizona, Nevada, Northern California, and all of California quite easily. Whereas if I was back in where I was born, back in eastern North Carolina, it would mean I could work South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, all those states, Georgia, would be within my normal daytime F layer propagation. Well, why can't I work New York? Why am I not being able to work New York? Well, on an angle that's that low in the propagation signal going away, I go through too much D layer. As you go through these layers, remember they have thickness, so when you hit them on a low angle, they're thicker, thicker, thicker. The lower the angle you hit them on, the more thickness you have to go through. And so they totally get absorbed. So I can't work New York on 40 meters in the middle of the day because the D layer is absorbing so much RF, I end up with nothing on the other end of the communications trail. Any questions at that point?
No, go ahead.
Okay, now let's move on up to 20 meters. Well, now we've doubled the frequency, we've doubled the energy that's required to bend it back, we doubled the fact that it can't be absorbed so easily. Now we may have signals from Texas to, all of North America can come through, because the D layer can't stop me, and yet it will bend back on all these different angles. And so most of the signals on this band are coming in at about 20 degrees to 40 degrees is where most of the signals are coming in at us. And that's why on the other lecture we talked about we want to have an antenna that gives us a lot of energy in that elevation, so we can have the maximum signals for using that. But what about using 20 meters to talk to, Nevada and Arizona? I probably won't hear them. And if I do hear them, it's backscatter off the F layer that's very, very weak. So the very frequencies that 40 meters covers during the daytime very nicely, which are very much straight up and straight down aren't there on 20 meters. But yet I've got all of North America because the D layer can't stop me and the F layer is bending me all over the place. I am usually above the E layer at this time. It's the F layer on 20 that's doing all the work during the daytime. Now, depending on, as we move on up to 17 meters and 15 meters, we may, right now, we're approaching the bottom of the sunspot cycle. Our solar flux energy is very low. It's only running about 70. And that means the total energy ionization coming from the sun, which is always the ultraviolet light and X-ray from the sun that does the ionization of all these layers. And depending on the amount of energy, the angle that it hits from the elevation of the sun is off the horizon, and all that determines how much ionization we have to deal with. Well, right now, 15 meters is shut down. We're going into space wave at all the different angles. It may get bent a whole bunch, but not enough to send it back down to the Earth. And that's the situation we're in right now. Conversely, if we were at the, let's go to the extreme. Let's say we had a sunspot number right now that was 150, which means we'd have a solar flux of 300, okay? Let's say we have a solar flux of 300 here in January of some years to come in the future. Well, 6 would probably open to Nova Scotia. And you say, my goodness, why would 6 open to Nova Scotia? 3,000 miles away. The longest stretch of F layer is normally about 2,400 miles. But that's assuming that you're dealing with something that is in the category of 100 or 200 miles in elevation, which is our 300 kilometers up there. Well, if the solar flux is at 300 or higher, that F3 layer may exist, the G layer exists. So it goes all the way up now to 600 kilometers. So 6 meters would go up through these layers, bending a little bit each time, hit the F layer and start bending and bending and bending and bending and bending. And eventually, with this long arch, be coming back down to Earth. And so when it comes down, instead of at 2,400 miles, it's coming down at 300 miles away, and voila, we would be talking to Nova Scotia. Or if it bent later on in the about noontime, it bent due south, we would hit Ecuador, and that's actually true for almost all the United States. Anybody in Oklahoma or Georgia or North Carolina or Tennessee, all the central part of the United States, when they look south, Ecuador is about that distance away, that same distance that will come bending down. Of course, those sort of things is once in a lifetime experiences. It's very, very rare to get F layer up on 6 meters. It happened back in 1957 and 58. It happened in 1979. Happened in 91. And we did have some, significant F layer even in 2003 or so. But since then, we haven't had any real phenomenal F layer like we were talking about. And what does that mean? Well, it means that if it was sitting that high, what would 10 meters be like? Well, it would be open all the time. It would now sound like 20 meters. You'd be hearing all of North America practically coming in all day long. And indeed, 10 meters would be open late at night, especially in the spring and fall. And this is a phenomenon many hams have not experienced for many, many years now. And so, but it can happen. So if 6 is open spasmodically, so it would be open an hour or two in the morning on F layer to Nova Scotia and down maybe as far as Maine. And I've heard it go as been back as close as Ohio on F layer, and also into Florida on F layer. So and the Caribbeans come through on F layer on 6. Well, then it goes away. You know, it goes away by, even when it's just phenomenal, it goes away by about 10 o'clock. Well, of course, 10 meters wouldn't go away. 10 meters is half the frequency. It's therefore twice as easy to bend back, and it's going to stay there all day. And the F layer does something that's kind of unusual. When you have lots of sunshine shining of all that ultraviolet light and X-ray pumping up the F layer at a high ionization level like we're talking about, when night comes, the D layer goes away almost immediately under all circumstances. The E layer also goes away very rapidly, except the sporadic E can be there all night long, bouncing around as those sporadic E clouds come and go. But the F layer will slowly start dropping in ionization, and the reason it's slow is the upper atmosphere will have expanded. It actually heats up and expands, and it contracts. We're talking about a mechanical contraction of all these hydrogen atoms and such. And as it contracts, all these lighter gases that are out there, as it contracts, it makes the density of the ionization go up. So even though the sun has gone down, the ionization is going up as it's dissipating. So it means the MUF, whatever the maximal usable frequency was, is maintaining itself after sundown. So you can go on in these weird conditions and you don't drop MUF until after midnight. So imagine coming on 10 meters and you'll be talking to Florida and New York and all of North America, and yet it's dark. You know, it's been dark for hours on the East Coast, and after midnight it finally starts dropping and could go on down to 20 meters before sunrise. But it's quite a weird, wonderful thing to be working F layer on 10 meters late at night. Well, I had never experienced that same kind of phenomenal F layer at night on 6. I wasn't sure that it ever really happened. But we had a phenomenal blowout of energy back in, I'm trying to remember the exact date. It was actually April of, it was in April 2003, something like that. And there had been a big solar flare, like one of the biggest ones in history, and it shut down all of HF for many, many days. That's the other thing, if you get a big solar flare, you can pump the D layer up so much that it really shuts down all of HF. The higher frequencies will always come back first, of course, because they can punch through the D layer easier than lower frequencies. So, as the things settled out, the geomagnetic storm, that Friday night, which is like 3 days afterwards or 4 days afterwards, the MUF on 6 meters shot all the way up to 6, and we were hearing a beacon out of Ecuador. Ecuador on pure F layer at 3,000-mile distance was there all night long. All night long. Even 2 o'clock in the morning, it was still coming through. I could not believe it. It was absolutely once in a lifetime to see nighttime F layer on 6 meters just coming through. And of course, the next morning, then it faded out just before sunrise. But immediately, the Caribbean islands came in, Nova Scotia came in as the sun rose up the next day. K6YYL, AA6DD.
Wow, that's pretty neat. Well, AA6DD, K6YYL, yeah. And okay, so what about my transequatorial contact at midnight to Australia? What was that? Remember, I think that was 2000. I think that was 2010. I'm thinking, yeah, about 2010 at midnight, and the Australia station called me at midnight here. So whatever time it was there, it was midnight here. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, so far we've just been talking about F layer and what it does and E layer, but we haven't talked about multi-modes. First off, we haven't talked about transequatorial. It turns out that when you look at the F layer, the most ionized part of the F layer is a region just above and just below the equator. Of course, you would expect that because that's where the sun is beaming directly straight down. And that ionized zone above and below the equator, and it follows the sun as the sun goes around the Earth. And so you always just beam into the sun. That's the direction it's going to be open. Is where the highest MUF is. And in fact, normal MUF compared to transequatorial, it's actually 1.5 times higher when you were talking about transequatorial. And transequatorial, it hits the first layer, and it's not ionized enough to send it back to Earth, but it sends it across the equator, way up there in the air, hits the other superionized spot on the other side of the equator, up in the air, and then it comes shooting down. And for all of the United States, Chile and Argentina is where it tends to come down at. It bounces that far. It's not a 2,500-mile hop. It's 6,000 miles that never hit the Earth. And it's 2 hops in the middle of the air. So that exists. Secondly, we have sporadic E and E layer. So signals can go through the E layer or be bent by sporadic E until it can find that. So your contact was because of the guy on the other end running probably a phenomenal station, probably stacked beams at a kilowatt, and at a low noise level. And so now we can do multiple propagation modes. In my opinion, what you had is you were bouncing first by an E cloud. So the E cloud got you 1,000 miles out into the Pacific, hitting the ocean out there. That next bounce would have been enough to get you to the equatorial regions and hit a transequatorial propagation on F layer. And then on his side, he probably was actually doing the transequatorial F layer directly. Though there could have been some other propagation mode in between him and you as well. He was very, very weak. But you pulled it off. It was very, very low angle. And it's quite a phenomenon. And it's one for the textbooks. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that was, like you said, he probably had a very low noise level, and I just had 100 watts. That was on my old Kenwood TS130S. So fun memory of that one, and I'm so glad that I heard him, calling me because I had my headphones, my wireless headphones, just walking around the house, and because I had told him, probably days earlier, I said, hey, give me a call anytime, even late at night, I might hear you, and sure enough, he did. So, and I'm glad you heard me work him, and so I think you heard both of us, right?
I could hear him in the noise, but he wasn't copyable. You have a better launch angle in that direction than I do. I have the Saddleback Mountains in the way, though they're way on the horizon. But it shows you, my launch angle in that direction is like, oh my God, a fraction of a degree. But your launch angle is like zero. You're launching, you're high enough on the side of Baldy there that you're seeing the Pacific Ocean if you're up on your roof. And you have nothing in the way, and that's why you were able to do it. Without your location, and he had to have been running power to overcome your noise level. And the reason he could hear your 100 watts is he had no noise level except atmospherics whatsoever. Go ahead.
Yeah, some hams are blessed that way. So, but that's why I love going camping, is that when I have the antennas and, radio all hooked up, and, the noise level is zero, and it's just amazing, what you can work in a location that has zero noise level. You can hear forever. So it's a wonderful thing. So all you hams who have no noise level, I'm very, I would love to experience that more often, and living in the city, nope, that doesn't happen here. So go ahead, Will, it's been wonderful. AA6DD, K6YYL.
K6YYL, AA6DD. Well, even when the Sunspot cycle, and even when we're at the bottom of the cycle, the F layer still works for 20 meters and 40 meters and 80 meters at night, 160 meters at night. Those signals get weaker. So it means you need to run a bigger station, better antennas, and more power to communicate during the bottom of the cycle. And even because of the wonderful propagation that 40 has in the nighttime and 20 has in the daytime, if you have a big gun station, you can still work all over the world. There's no place that still cannot be communicated to. But obviously, when the ionization goes way up and the sunspot cycle goes way up and these other bands open up, it makes it much, much easier. You can run a lot less power if you can ride the MUF right where the F layer is doing its job. Signals will always be so much louder because there's no D-layer absorption, and you can get away with very modest power levels. But you got to be aware that that's sort of an exception to the rule. Right now, for the next few years, we need to keep pumping with as much antlers and as much power as we can to keep activity going, both direct wave on the VHF bands and F layer on the HF bands, and ground wave on the lower parts of 80 meters and even 160 meters, and enjoy all the aspects of ham radio. And then we're going to be going up, in my opinion, in the next year we'll start up on the cycle. I think we'll hit the bottom this year. I think we'll hit the bottom maybe, November the 1st, through December and through January. Then it'll start up, in my opinion, the next cycle. And don't believe the doomsayers. Nobody knows what the next cycle will do. Nobody's ever been able to predict any of these cycles with any kind of accuracy whatsoever, and nobody knows. So it'll either be better than the last cycle or worse. So we'll have to enjoy it, as it happens in any case. But still, there's so many things we can do, and here we are on 6 meters communicating on direct wave, and you and I can talk here 35 miles apart all the time, anytime, and have wonderful local QSOs. K6YYL, AA6DD.
Absolutely. It's really nice that, how clear it is, and it's definitely fun. AA6DD, K6YYL.
Okay, so that means that we can look forward to an interesting Spraticke season is coming up also. Spraticke is a phenomenon that happens in the E region, and it's generated by a whole bunch of different stuff and combinations of different stuff, and it's usually best at the bottom of the sunspot cycle. And Spraticke clouds form, and they can last for a few minutes or a few hours. They actually go north on them. They move at about 150 miles an hour, going north on the magnetic lines of the Earth in the E region of the ionosphere. And they can bend back signals as high as at least 220, and there has been some reports of even 450 megacycles that may have been bent back by Spraticke clouds. Obviously, same situation. The lower the frequency you go, the more prevalent they are, so that Spraticke shows up twice as easy on 10 meters than it does 6, and twice as easy on 20 meters than it does on 10, and so forth. But because of F layer on 20 meters is there all the time, nobody pays attention to it. Because Spraticke is much, much weaker, 20 to 40 dBs weaker than F layer. So a signal that would be, 40 over S9 with F layer is only going to be S9 with Spraticke. And the Spraticke distance, because it's much, much lower in elevation than the F layers, is going to be about 1,000 miles. The maximum is 1,400 miles, and it can be quite short. It can be 300 miles or 600 miles. So it can ionize a lot and be quite short. If you heard a Spraticke signal that was 600 miles away on 10 meters, what would you expect on 6 meters, twice the frequency? Should there be a signal there from somewhere? Go ahead, Tim.
Yes.
And how far away would it be going off that same ionized cloud?
Okay, well, I'm thinking, New Mexico?
Well, we're just thinking theoretically here, but if it's 600 miles being bent 600 miles is the angle on 10 meters, what would be the mileage on 6 meters?
Well, I'll let you go ahead. Go ahead.
It's going to be twice. Its frequency is proportional to energy. It's going to be 1,200 miles.
All right, go ahead.
So, I told Kim I have seen this before a number of times where I've been on 10 meters and I hear somebody, for example, on 10 meters that was working each other, and they were 600 miles apart. Let's say I heard somebody in New Mexico on 10 working somebody in Colorado on 10. Well, unless it's F layer backscatter, if they've got reasonable signal levels they're giving each other, they're saying you're S9 or something, well then you look at that distance between the two, find the center point, and there sits the cloud. And the distance they're apart is only 600 miles. Well, if that cloud is there, that means that from Southern California across that cloud would come down in North Dakota. So I immediately went to 6 meters, pointed my beam that way, called CQ, and a station in North Dakota came back to me.
That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah, but I was just saying New Mexico because I hear New Mexico quite a lot and of course Texas when 6 meters is open. So, but you're the 6 meter expert. So, and I really appreciate all of your information on that.
Okay, Kim. Yeah, well, that's, Texas is, the 100th meridian is wonderful for Sprattiki because the whole world is only about 1,000 miles away from you as long as you're on the 100th meridian. Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, straight up to the center of the United States. And yes, for us, Sprattiki, when it forms, quite often gives us that distance of 1,000 to 1,400 miles, which takes in New Mexico and South Texas. And the clouds start down there, or they actually start into Mexico. We hear the guys in Mexico now because there's more hams on in Mexico than we used to. And the cloud will go north, and eventually, as the cloud goes north, we will eventually work first Texas, and then along the Rio Grande, and then Central Texas and North Texas, and New Mexico, and Kansas, and Oklahoma, and then it goes all the way around. We work in Colorado, and in the evening, eventually we're working Idaho and Oregon and Washington. Now, it may or may not be the same cloud, but it can be other clouds being generated. But even if it is the same cloud, the reason it does that swinging like that is the Earth moves underneath it. And so, as far as the cloud itself, it's just going due north on the magnetic lines of force, but because the Earth is rotating over a number of hours, and that cloud is moving at 150 miles an hour, it looks like it makes an arc like that for us. And that's the pattern of good Sprattiki clouds. And of course, we can have double clouds. We can hit one cloud in Texas, that gets us into Texas, and if we have another cloud that gets us into Georgia or Florida or North Carolina, that's double hop Sprattiki, and signals get another 6 dBs weaker. But if you have enough antlers and power, you can do double hop on 10 meters and 6 meters Sprattiki. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So we should probably wrap this up, and then I do love this conversation, and probably wrap it up maybe in 3 minutes if you want to finish up on the Sprattiki.
Okay. Well, the thing to be aware of is at the bottom of the cycle this year and next year is a phenomenon that's not published anywhere, but it's real. And nobody knows why, but the amount of Sprattiki has significantly increases at the bottom of the sunspot cycle. And it shows up in months where it normally doesn't show up. Sprattiki is normally a May, June, July, and August phenomena, but in the bottom of the cycle, it can show up anytime. So I look for Sprattiki to show up as early as March this year and go through September of this year, whereas normally for Southern California, it doesn't show up until the middle of May and go through the middle of August. So you see the spread is much more, and the amount of double hop goes way up as well at the bottom of the cycle. So the next 2 years should be very interesting on Sprattiki throughout for 6 meters and for 10 meters. And remember, it does exist on lower frequencies. We just don't use it normally because it's so much weaker than F layer. So, if it's, and it's sort of weird because you think, well, gee, 15 meters isn't open and 6 is. Well, no, it's just all us 6-meter people are on here making it happen. If it's happening on 6, you know that the same E layers are bending back even shorter, 10 meters, and even 15 meters, they're bending back 15 even shorter. So get out there and have fun and explore all those possibilities.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. It's been so much fun, and I love doing this, and I hope other people enjoy it too, because it's just, your wealth of information is great, and I want to tap into that wealth of information as much as I can. And one day you and I won't be here, but hopefully these videos will be, I hope, somewhere. Hopefully somebody will archive them as well. That's okay. And we'll just continue doing on the videos. So go ahead, and we'll just say I guess we should probably just close it up for now. AA6DD K6YYL.
Okay, 73s.
All right, 73 will AA6DD K6YYL.
K6YYL, AA6DD. We'll be back monitoring.